In a world where kindness seems scarce, one woman's journey from the brink of despair to unexpected redemption will challenge everything you thought you knew about forgiveness and second chances. When Ashley Wilson, struggling with her weight and self-worth, faces a moment of humiliation that pushes her to the edge, a chance encounter on a bridge changes the course of her life forever. But as she embarks on a year-long mission of daily acts of kindness, she'll discover that the greatest challenge isn't helping others. It's confronting the painful secrets of her past and finding the strength to forgive the unforgivable. Will Ashley's promise to a stranger be the key to her own salvation, or will the weight of her newfound purpose prove too much to bear? As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the blinds of her small apartment in Boulder, Colorado, Ashley Wilson stirred reluctantly from her fitful sleep. The warm glow of dawn did little to brighten her mood as she stared at the ceiling, her mind already racing with anxiety about the day ahead. At 35, Ashley had grown accustomed to the daily struggle of living in a body that society seemed to reject at every turn. But today was different. Today, she had to face one of her greatest fears head-on. With a heavy sigh, Ashley swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet searching for the worn slippers that had seen better days. As she padded to the bathroom, she couldn't help but catch a glimpse of herself in the full-length mirror that hung on the back of her bedroom door. The reflection that stared back at her was one she had long struggled to accept, a plus-size woman with curves that didn't fit the mold of what fashion magazines deemed beautiful. Ashley's fingers traced the invitation that sat on her dresser, the elegant script a stark contrast to the chaos of her thoughts. Her best friend, Jessica, was getting married in just 2 weeks, and Ashley was determined to find a dress that would make her feel beautiful, if only for one day. The thought of entering a high-end boutique filled her with dread, but she was resolute. This wasn't just about a dress. It was about proving to herself that she deserved to take up space in a world that often made her feel invisible. As she went through her morning routine, Ashley's mind wandered to the countless times she had been overlooked, judged, or outright dismissed because of her size. The job interviews where the interviewer's eyes had flickered with barely concealed disdain, the dates that ended before they began, the whispers and stares that followed her in public spaces. Each memory was a weight on her shoulders, threatening to crush her spirit. But today was supposed to be different. Ashley had spent weeks psyching herself up for this shopping trip, scouring online reviews to find a boutique that claimed to cater to women of all sizes. Elegance Unlimited boasted a wide range of designer dresses, and their website showcased models of various body types. It seemed too good to be true, but Ashley clung to the hope that this time, things would be different. As she applied a light layer of makeup, Ashley practiced the affirmations her therapist had taught her. I am worthy. I am beautiful. I deserve to feel good in my own skin. The words felt hollow, but she repeated them like a mantra, willing herself to believe them. The drive to downtown Boulder was a blur of autumn colors and nervous energy. Ashley's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as she navigated the familiar streets, her heart racing with each block that brought her closer to the boutique. She parked her car a block away, taking a moment to collect herself before stepping out onto the sidewalk. The crisp October air nipped at her cheeks as Ashley made her way down Pearl Street, the pedestrian mall bustling with the usual mix of college students, tourists, and locals. She couldn't help but notice how effortlessly everyone else seemed to move through the world, their bodies fitting seamlessly into the latest fall fashions. Ashley tugged self-consciously at her oversized sweater, wishing for the umpteenth time that she could disappear into the background. As she approached Elegance Unlimited, Ashley's steps slowed. The boutique's window display was a vision of tulle and satin, with mannequins that, despite the store's claims, all seemed to be a standard size too. Taking a deep breath, Ashley pushed open the heavy glass door, the soft chime of bells announcing her arrival. The interior of the boutique was everything Ashley had imagined and feared. Racks of designer dresses lined the walls, their fabrics shimmering under the soft lighting. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, and the plush carpet muffled the sound of Ashley's hesitant footsteps. For a moment, Ashley allowed herself to dream. She imagined finding the perfect dress, one that hugged her curves in all the right places and made her feel like the belle of the ball. She pictured the look of joy on Jessica's face when she saw Ashley at the wedding, confident and radiant. For just a second, Ashley believed that she belonged in this world of beauty and elegance. That dream shattered the moment Madison stepped into view. The boutique manager was everything Ashley was not: tall, willowy, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Madison's gaze swept over Ashley, and in that split second, Ashley saw the flicker of judgment she had come to expect. "Can I help you?" Madison's voice was polite, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Confusion, perhaps, or thinly veiled disdain. Ashley swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Yes, I'm looking for a dress for my friend's wedding. Something elegant, maybe in a deep blue or purple." Madison's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched slightly. "I see. And what size were you looking for?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Ashley felt her cheeks burn as she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "At 22, if you have it." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's smile tightened, and Ashley could almost see the wheels turning in her head, searching for a polite way to say what they both knew was coming. "I'm afraid we don't carry that size in our designer collections," Madison said, her tone a mixture of feigned regret and poorly concealed relief. "Perhaps you might have better luck at one of the department stores? They often have more accommodating options." Each word was a knife, cutting deeper than Ashley had anticipated. She stood frozen, aware of the curious glances from other customers, their whispers barely audible but painfully clear in their intent. Madison, seemingly oblivious to the damage her words had inflicted, continued, "Of course, we do have some lovely accessories that might suit you. Shoes, perhaps? Or a handbag?" Ashley's vision blurred, tears threatening to spill over. She wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. But years of conditioning had taught her to swallow her pain, to make herself small and unobtrusive. "No, thank you," she managed to choke out. I'll go." As Ashley turned to leave, her elbow caught on a nearby rack, sending a cascade of silk dresses to the floor. The sound of hangers clattering against the hardwood was like thunder in the suddenly silent boutique. Ashley's hands shook as she bent to gather the fallen garments, acutely aware of Madison's exasperated sigh and the tittering laughter of a group of women near the dressing rooms. "Please, just leave them," Madison said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "We'll take care of it. I think it's best if you go now." The dismissal was clear. Ashley straightened, her chest tight with humiliation and unshed tears. She couldn't bring herself to look at anyone as she hurried towards the exit, the bell's cheerful chime a mockery of her pain. Once outside, Ashley gulped in the cool air, willing herself not to break down in the middle of Pearl Street. She walked blindly, barely aware of her surroundings, her mind replaying the scene in the boutique on an endless loop. Each step took her further from the glittering world she had dared to dream she could be part of, and closer to the harsh reality she had always known. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the streets of Boulder, Ashley found herself in a small park on the outskirts of downtown. She collapsed onto a bench, finally allowing the tears to flow freely. The weight of a lifetime of rejection and self-doubt crashed over her like a tidal wave, leaving her gasping for air. In that moment, as the last light of day faded and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ashley Wilson felt truly and utterly alone. The world had once again reminded her that she didn't fit, that she wasn't enough, that she didn't deserve the simple joy of feeling beautiful. As she sat there, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had irrevocably broken. The tiny flame of hope she had nurtured for so long flickered dangerously, threatened by the cold winds of reality. Little did Ashley know that this day, painful as it was, would be the catalyst for a journey that would change her life forever. As she made her way home in the gathering darkness, her mind turned to darker thoughts, unaware that fate had set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she believed about herself and the world around her. The stage was set, the players in place. Ashley Wilson's story was about to take a turn that no one, least of all herself, could have predicted. The soft glow of streetlights filtered through the blinds of Ashley's apartment, casting long shadows across the cluttered living room. She sat motionless on the couch, her phone buzzing insistently on the coffee table. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, a reminder of the world Ashley was desperately trying to shut out. With a trembling hand, she reached out and silenced the device, guilt gnawing at her insides as she imagined her friend's worry. As the room fell into silence, memories of the day's humiliation crashed over Ashley like relentless waves. The boutique incident wasn't just a singular moment of shame. It was the culmination of a lifetime of rejection and self-doubt. Her mind, unbidden, began to wander through the minefield of her past. Suddenly, she was 12 again, standing in the middle of the school cafeteria, chocolate milk dripping down her shirt as laughter erupted around her. "Watch where you're going, fatty." The words, spoken by a boy she'd had a crush on, still stung as if they were fresh. Ashley remembered how she'd run to the bathroom, locking herself in a stall until the bell rang, her sobs muffled by her hands. The scene shifted, and now she was 19, nervously primping in front of her dorm room mirror. It was her first college party, and her roommate had convinced her to come along. "You look great," Sarah had assured her. But the tight knot in Ashley's stomach told a different story. That night ended with Ashley huddled in a corner, nursing a warm beer, watching as her peers paired off and disappeared into the night. No one had even glanced her way. Another memory surfaced, this one more recent and perhaps more painful. Ashley, 28 and finally feeling confident enough to try online dating. After weeks of messaging, she'd agreed to meet Mark for coffee. His profile had been kind, his messages thoughtful. But the moment he saw her, Ashley knew it was over. The flash of disappointment in his eyes, quickly masked by politeness, was unmistakable. The date lasted exactly 1 cup of coffee, ending with a stilted, "I'll call you," that they both knew was a lie. But the most gut-wrenching memory, the one that threatened to pull Ashley under completely, was the day she lost her parents. 5 years ago, on a rainy April morning, a police officer had shown up at her door. There had been an accident, he said. A drunk driver. Neither of her parents had survived the impact. In the days and weeks that followed, Ashley had felt more alone than ever before. As she stood at the funeral, accepting condolences from relatives and family friends, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was a disappointment even in grief. Her aunt's words, meant to be comforting, had cut deep. "At least you have your health, dear. Your mother always worried about your weight, you know. Maybe now you can focus on taking care of yourself." The weight of these memories, coupled with the fresh wound of today's rejection, felt unbearable. Ashley's gaze drifted to the framed photo on her bookshelf, her parents on their last anniversary, smiling and full of life. "I'm sorry," she whispered to their frozen images. "I'm sorry I couldn't be the daughter you deserved." With a sudden burst of energy fueled by despair, Ashley stumbled to her desk. She pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen, her hand shaking as she began to write. The words flowed, a torrent of pain and regret spilling onto the page. "Dear Jessica," she began, the letters blurring as tears fell onto the paper. "I'm sorry I won't be at your wedding. I'm sorry I couldn't find a dress, couldn't be the friend you deserved. I'm sorry for all the times I've been a burden, for all the moments my insecurities have cast a shadow over our friendship." Ashley paused, taking a shuddering breath before continuing. "I'm tired, Jess. Tired of feeling like I don't belong in this world. Tired of being a disappointment to everyone around me. I can't do it anymore. Please don't blame yourself. This isn't your fault. It's too much. The world isn't made for people like me, and I'm done trying to force myself to fit." She went on, pouring out apologies to her coworkers, to the distant relatives who would have to deal with the aftermath of her decision. With each word, Ashley felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. This was it. An end to the pain, the rejection, the constant battle with a world that seemed determined to remind her of her inadequacies. As she signed her name at the bottom of the letter, Ashley felt a sense of finality. She folded the paper carefully, placing it in an envelope which she propped against the photo of her parents. "I'll see you soon," she murmured, her fingers lingering on their smiling faces. Without bothering to change out of the clothes she'd worn to the boutique, Ashley grabbed her keys and headed out into the night. The streets of Boulder were quiet, most of its residents tucked away in their homes or enjoying late dinners in cozy restaurants. Ashley walked with purpose, her feet carrying her towards the outskirts of town, to a place she'd discovered on one of her many solitary walks. The bridge loomed ahead, its steel frame a dark silhouette against the night sky. Ashley approached slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The rushing water below seemed to call to her, promising an end to the pain that had become her constant companion. As she climbed onto the railing, Ashley closed her eyes. The cool night air whipped around her, tugging at her clothes and hair. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to simply let go, to fall into the darkness and finally be free of the judgments and disappointments that had defined her life. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. This was it. No more struggling to fit in, no more pitying looks or cruel whispers. Just peace, just silence. Ashley leaned forward, her grip on the railing loosening. In that moment, balanced on the edge between life and death, a voice cut through the night air, startling her back to reality. "Wait, please. I just want to talk." Ashley's eyes flew open, her heart racing as she turned towards the source of the voice. There, illuminated by the dim light of a distant street lamp, stood an elderly man. His eyes, kind and filled with concern, met hers. "Who are you?" Ashley demanded, her voice cracking with emotion. "Why are you here?" The old man took a cautious step forward, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "My name is Frank," he said softly, "and I'm here because, many years ago, I stood exactly where you're standing now." Ashley's grip on the railing tightened, her mind reeling. She hadn't planned for this, hadn't expected anyone to interfere with her decision. Yet something in Frank's voice, in the gentle understanding in his eyes, made her hesitate. "Please," Frank continued, taking another small step towards her. "Just give me a few minutes. That's all I ask. A few minutes to talk and then... well, then you can decide what you want to do." For a long moment, Ashley remained frozen, torn between the pull of the rushing water below and the unexpected lifeline this stranger was offering. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. As Ashley slowly turned to face Frank, still perched precariously on the bridge's railing, neither of them could have known that this moment, this chance encounter on a cold October night, would be the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. The night wind continued to whisper around them, carrying with it the promise of a story yet to unfold, a tale of redemption, forgiveness, and the extraordinary power of human connection. The gentle whispering of the wind and the distant rush of the river below filled the tense silence between Ashley and Frank. The old man's weathered face was etched with concern, his eyes never leaving Ashley as she clung to the bridge railing, her knuckles white with the effort of holding on or perhaps holding back. "Why don't you come down from there?" Frank suggested, his voice soft but steady. "It's a bit chilly tonight, and I'm not as spry as I used to be. I'd feel better if we could talk on solid ground." Ashley hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to ignore this interruption, to follow through with her plan and end the pain that had become her constant companion. But another part, a tiny spark she thought had been extinguished, flickered with curiosity about this stranger and his story. With a deep breath, Ashley slowly swung her legs back over the railing, her feet touching the concrete of the bridge with a soft thud. She stumbled slightly, her legs weak from the adrenaline coursing through her body. Frank reached out instinctively to steady her, but stopped short, sensing her need for space. "Thank you," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I know a little diner just down the road. Open all night and they make a mean cup of hot chocolate. What do you say we get out of this cold and have a chat?" Ashley nodded mutely, still not trusting herself to speak. As they walked side by side towards the promise of warmth and comfort, she couldn't help but steal glances at her unexpected companion. Frank walked with a slight limp, his silver hair ruffled by the night breeze. He exuded an aura of calm that seemed at odds with the tumultuous emotions swirling inside her. The diner was a beacon of light in the darkness, its neon sign flickering weakly above the entrance. A bell chimed softly as they entered, the warmth inside a stark contrast to the chill of the October night. The lone waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, nodded at Frank in recognition. "The usual, Frank?" she called out, already reaching for a coffee pot. "2 hot chocolates tonight, Doris," Frank replied with a smile. "And maybe a slice of that apple pie if you've got any left." They settled into a booth near the back, the cracked vinyl seats squeaking slightly under their weight. Ashley wrapped her hands around the steaming mug of hot chocolate, grateful for its warmth against her cold fingers. "So," Frank began, his tone conversational, "want to tell me what brought you to that bridge tonight?" Ashley stared into her mug, watching the marshmallows slowly melt into the rich brown liquid. It's everything," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just so tired of feeling like I don't belong anywhere, like I'm a disappointment to everyone, including myself." Frank nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "I know that feeling all too well," he said. "Would you believe me if I told you that 40 years ago, I stood on that very same bridge, ready to jump?" Ashley's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "You? But why?" A sad smile played across Frank's lips. "I lost my wife and daughter in a car accident," he said softly. "A drunk driver. One moment they were there and the next, gone. I couldn't see a way forward without them. The guilt, the pain, it was overwhelming." As Frank spoke, Ashley felt a shift inside her. The raw ache of her own pain was still there, but now it was tinged with something else through empathy for this man who had suffered such a profound loss. "What stopped you?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. Frank's eyes took on a faraway look. "A stranger," he said, "just like I was for you tonight. An old woman out for a late-night walk with her dog. She saw me on the bridge and struck up a conversation. Talked about everything and nothing for hours. By the time the sun came up, I realized I wasn't ready to give up just yet." He paused, taking a sip of his hot chocolate. "That woman made me promise to live for 1 more year. Just 1 year," she said. "And in that year, try to help 1 person every day. Big or small, doesn't matter. Just make a difference in someone's life." Ashley felt a lump forming in her throat. "And did you keep that promise? Frank nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I did. And you know what? That year turned into 2, then 5, then 10. Each small act of kindness, each life I touched, it gave me purpose. It didn't erase the pain of losing my family, but it gave me a reason to keep going." As Frank spoke, Ashley found herself hanging on every word. His story of loss and redemption resonated deep within her, striking a chord she didn't even know existed. "But what about you?" Frank asked gently. "What brought you to that bridge tonight?" And so, over cooling mugs of hot chocolate and slices of apple pie, Ashley poured out her story. She told Frank about the incident at the boutique, about years of feeling invisible and unwanted. She spoke of lost friendships, failed relationships, and the constant battle with her own self-image. Frank listened intently, offering no judgment, only understanding nods and the occasional comforting word. As Ashley spoke, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt truly heard. As her story came to an end, Frank reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. "Ashley," he said, his voice filled with warmth, "I want you to make me a promise. The same promise that old woman asked of me all those years ago." Ashley looked up, meeting Frank's kind gaze. "What promise?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me you'll live for 1 more year," Frank said. "And in that year, try to help 1 person every day. It doesn't have to be big, a kind word, a small gesture, anything. Just make a difference in someone's life." Ashley felt tears welling up in her eyes. The idea seemed so simple, yet so daunting. I don't know if I can," she admitted. Frank squeezed her hand gently. "You can," he assured her. "And I'll be here to support you every step of the way. We can meet here at this diner once a week. You can tell me about the people you've helped, and I'll share some stories of my own. What do you say?" For a long moment, Ashley was silent. The pain and despair that had driven her to the bridge still lingered, but alongside it, a tiny seed of hope had been planted. She thought about Frank's story, about the impact one person could have on another's life. She thought about the stranger who had saved Frank, and how that act of kindness had rippled out through the years, eventually reaching her on this cold October night. Finally, Ashley nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I promise. 1 year." Frank's face lit up with a warm smile. "That's all I ask," he said. 1 year, 1 day at a time. And who knows, you might just surprise yourself." As they left the diner, the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. Ashley took a deep breath, the crisp morning air filling her lungs. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of possibility. "Same time next week?" Frank asked as they prepared to part ways. Ashley nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Same time next week," she confirmed. As she watched Frank's retreating figure, Ashley felt a mixture of emotions washing over her. Fear, uncertainty, but also a tiny spark of hope. She didn't know what the coming year would bring, but she had made a promise to Frank and to herself. With one last look at the bridge where her life had nearly ended, and in a way, begun anew, Ashley turned and started the walk home. The day that had started with such despair had ended with an unexpected lifeline. Now, it was up to her to see where this new path would lead. As the sun rose over Boulder, casting long shadows across the streets, Ashley Wilson took her first steps into a future she never expected to have. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with ups and downs. But for now, she had a purpose. 1 year, one person each day, a promise of hope in a world that suddenly seemed a little bit brighter. The early morning sun filtered through Ashley's bedroom window, casting a warm glow across her rumpled sheets. For a moment, as consciousness slowly returned, the events of the previous night seemed like a distant dream. But as Ashley's eyes fell on the calendar hanging on her wall, the reality of her promise to Frank came rushing back. Day 1 of 365. One person to help. One small act of kindness. Ashley sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. The weight of the task ahead felt monumental, but she couldn't deny the tiny spark of purpose that had taken root in her chest. With a deep breath, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up. It was time to face the world. As she went through her morning routine, Ashley's mind raced with possibilities. Who would she help today? What could she do? The enormity of the promise threatened to overwhelm her, but she clung to Frank's words from the night before. It doesn't have to be big. A kind word, a small gesture, anything. Stepping out of her apartment building, Ashley was immediately enveloped by the crisp autumn air. The streets of Boulder were coming to life, with early morning joggers and commuters starting their day. As she walked towards the local coffee shop, her usual first stop, Ashley found herself more aware of the people around her than ever before. At the corner of Pearl and 17th, she noticed an elderly woman struggling with a heavy grocery bag. Without thinking, Ashley approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am? Would you like some help with that?" The woman looked up, surprise and then relief washing over her face. "Oh dear, that would be wonderful. These old bones aren't what they used to be." As Ashley took the bag, she felt a small thrill. Was this it? Her first act of kindness? It seemed so simple, yet the gratitude in the woman's eyes was unmistakable. "I'm just a block away," the woman said, gesturing down the street. "I hope it's not too much trouble." "Not at all," Ashley replied, falling into step beside her. "I'm Ashley, by the way." "Margaret," the woman said with a warm smile. "You know, it's not often you see young people willing to help strangers these days. Your parents must be very proud." The comment stung, bringing back memories of her lost parents, but Ashley pushed the pain aside. They taught me the importance of kindness, she said softly. As they reached Margaret's apartment building, the old woman insisted on inviting Ashley in for a cup of tea. It's the least I can do to thank you, she said. Inside Margaret's cozy apartment, surrounded by photos of what seemed to be a large, loving family, Ashley found herself opening up. She told Margaret about her promise to help someone every day for a year, carefully omitting the circumstances that led to it. Margaret listened intently, her eyes twinkling. "What a wonderful idea," she said. "You know, I think you've inspired me. Perhaps I'll try to do the same in my own small way." As Ashley left Margaret's apartment an hour later, she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the tea. One day down, 364 to go. The next few days passed in a blur of small kindnesses. Ashley bought coffee for the person behind her in line, helped a lost tourist find their way to the Flatirons, and even spent an afternoon volunteering at the local animal shelter. Each act, no matter how small, lifted her spirits and made the world seem a little brighter. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. On day 5, Ashley found herself back at the boutique where her journey had begun. Her hands shook as she pushed open the door, the cheerful chime of bells now seeming almost mocking. Madison, the manager who had humiliated her, was behind the counter. Ashley took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the counter. Madison looked up, recognition and then confusion flashing across her face. I wanted to apologize for the other day," Ashley continued, her voice trembling slightly, "for knocking over the dresses. I hope I didn't cause too much trouble." Madison's perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Oh," she said, clearly thrown off balance. That's very kind of you, but really it wasn't a big deal." Ashley nodded, ready to leave, but something made her pause. "Actually," she said, "I was wondering if you could help me. My friend is getting married, and I need a dress. I know you don't carry my size, but maybe you could recommend somewhere that does." For a moment, Madison looked uncomfortable, but then her professional demeanor took over. "Of course," she said, reaching for a pen and paper. "There's a boutique across town that specializes in plus-size formal wear. They have some beautiful designs." As Madison wrote down the address, Ashley noticed something she had missed before: a framed photo on the counter of a young girl in a wheelchair, smiling brightly. Madison caught her looking and smiled softly. "My daughter, Emily," she explained. "She has cerebral palsy." In that moment, Ashley saw Madison in a new light, not as the cruel, judgmental woman who had humiliated her, but as a human being with her own struggles and complexities. "She's beautiful," Ashley said sincerely. "Thank you for your help." As she left the boutique, Ashley felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She hadn't just completed another act of kindness. She had taken a step towards healing her own wounds. The week flew by, each day bringing new opportunities and challenges. Ashley found herself becoming more aware of the people around her, more attuned to the small ways she could make a difference. She helped an overwhelmed mother calm a crying baby on the bus, spent an afternoon reading to residents at a nursing home, and even stood up to a group of teenagers who were harassing a homeless man in the park. Before she knew it, it was time for her weekly meeting with Frank. As she pushed open the door of the diner, the familiar smell of coffee and pie washing over her, Ashley realized she was actually excited to share her experiences. Frank was already there, nursing a cup of coffee. His face lit up as he saw her approach. "Ashley," he said warmly, "how was your first week?" As they settled into their usual booth, Ashley found herself pouring out the stories of the past 7 days. She told Frank about Margaret, about her encounter with Madison, about the small victories and the moments of doubt. Frank listened intently, nodding and smiling. When Ashley finished, he reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "You're doing great." "It's harder than I thought it would be," Ashley admitted. "Some days I still struggle to get out of bed, but then I remember my promise, and it gives me a reason to keep going." Frank's eyes crinkled with understanding. "That's the secret," he said. It's not about grand gestures or changing the world overnight. It's about showing up, day after day, and doing what you can. The real change happens inside you. As they continued to talk, sharing stories and insights, Ashley felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. Here, in this small diner with this kind old man, she had found a safe harbor in the storm of her life. When it was time to leave, Frank surprised her with a small notebook. "To keep track of your acts of kindness," he explained. "Sometimes, on the hard days, it helps to look back and see how far you've come." Ashley clutched the notebook to her chest, tears pricking at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. As she walked home that night, the stars twinkling overhead, Ashley felt a glimmer of hope for the future. 1 week down, 51 to go. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to face it. Little did she know that her journey was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. The crisp autumn air had given way to the first chill of winter as Ashley hurried down Pearl Street, her breath forming small clouds in front of her. It had been 6 weeks since her fateful night on the bridge, and while some days were still a struggle, she found herself looking forward to her daily acts of kindness with growing enthusiasm. Today's mission was clear in her mind. She was heading to the local community center to volunteer for their after-school program. As she walked, Ashley's thoughts drifted to her last meeting with Frank. She had noticed him coughing more than usual, a worrying pallor to his normally ruddy cheeks. When she had asked if he was feeling all right, Frank had waved off her concerns with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lost in thought, Ashley almost collided with someone exiting a shop. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, looking up to find herself face to face with Madison, the boutique manager. Recognition flashed in Madison's eyes. "Ashley, right?" she said, her tone uncertain. How are you?" Ashley was about to give a polite, non-committal answer when she noticed the dark circles under Madison's eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched a stack of papers. Something was wrong. "I'm doing well," Ashley replied carefully. "But are you okay? You seem stressed." Madison's composed facade crumbled slightly. It's nothing. Just having a rough day." In that moment, Ashley made a split-second decision. "Listen," she said, "I was just heading to grab a coffee. Would you like to join me? Sometimes it helps to talk." Surprise flickered across Madison's face, followed by hesitation and then, to Ashley's amazement, relief. "You know what? I'd like that." As they settled into a quiet corner of a nearby cafe, Ashley couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns life could take. Here she was, sitting across from the woman who had once humiliated her, now feeling an inexplicable urge to help her. "So," Ashley began gently, "what's going on?" Madison stared into her latte for a long moment before speaking. "I lost my job," she said quietly. "The boutique, they're closing down. Budget cuts," they said. "And with Emily's medical bills." Her voice trailed off, thick with unshed tears. Ashley felt a pang of empathy. "I'm so sorry," she said sincerely. "That must be incredibly stressful." Madison nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I don't know what I'm going to do. Finding a new job that allows me the flexibility to care for Emily. It seems impossible." As Madison spoke about her struggles, Ashley found herself sharing her own story about her parents, her depression, and her promise to Frank. With each word, the walls between them seemed to crumble. "That's incredible," Madison said when Ashley finished. "And here I thought you were just coming back to the boutique to make me feel bad." Ashley chuckled softly. "Believe me, that was the last thing on my mind." As they continued to talk, an idea began to form in Ashley's mind. "You know," she said hesitantly, "I might be able to help. My company is actually hiring for a remote customer service position. The hours are flexible, and you'd be able to work from home." Madison's eyes widened. "Are you serious? That sounds perfect, but why would you help me? After how I treated you?" Ashley smiled, thinking of Frank and the promise that had changed her life. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," she said simply. "And sometimes, the people we least expect end up being the ones who need our kindness the most." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ashley helped Madison prepare for the interview, even babysitting Emily one afternoon so Madison could focus on updating her resume. To both their delight, Madison got the job. As Ashley left the community center one evening, feeling the warm glow of a day well spent, her phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Emily asked if her Aunt Ashley could come for dinner this weekend. "What do you say?" Ashley felt a lump form in her throat. Aunt Ashley. It was a title she never expected to have, especially not like this. As she typed out her reply, "I'd love to," she couldn't help but marvel at how much her life had changed in such a short time. However, her moment of joy was interrupted by another text, this one from Doris at the diner. "Frank collapsed. He's at Boulder Community Health. Come quick." Ashley's heart dropped. She flagged down a taxi, her mind racing with worry. As the city lights blurred past the window, she thought about Frank, his kindness, his wisdom, the way he had saved her life that night on the bridge. She couldn't lose him. Not now. At the hospital, Ashley found Doris pacing in the waiting room. "They won't tell me anything," Doris said, her usually cheerful face lined with worry. "I'm not family." Hours passed in an agonizing blur of bad coffee and uncomfortable chairs. Finally, a doctor emerged, looking tired but relieved. "Mr. Miller is stable," he announced. "He had a minor heart attack, but we caught it in time. He's asking for Ashley." Relief flooded through Ashley as she followed the doctor to Frank's room. She found him propped up in bed, looking pale but alert. "There she is," Frank said with a weak smile. "My guardian angel." Ashley felt tears spring to her eyes as she took Frank's hand. "You scared me," she said softly. I thought I was going to lose you." Frank squeezed her hand. "Can't get rid of me that easily," he joked, but then his expression turned serious. "Ashley, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." As Frank began to speak, Ashley felt the world tilt on its axis. His words washed over her like a tidal wave, each revelation more shocking than the last. By the time he finished, Ashley's mind was reeling, her heart a tumult of conflicting emotions. She stood abruptly, needing air, needing space to process what she had just learned. I need some time," she stammered, backing towards the door. Frank nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and fear. "I understand," he said softly. "Just, please don't disappear. Whatever you're feeling, we can work through it together." Ashley fled the hospital room, her feet carrying her through unfamiliar corridors until she found herself outside. The cold night air hit her like a slap, grounding her in the present moment. As she stood there, shivering in the hospital parking lot, Ashley felt as if her entire world had been turned upside down. The man who had saved her life, who had become her mentor and friend, was suddenly a stranger. And yet, as the initial shock began to fade, she realized that the core of who Frank was, his kindness, his wisdom, his genuine care for her, remained unchanged. Ashley took a deep breath, her hand instinctively reaching for the small notebook Frank had given her. As she flipped through the pages, each entry a testament to the journey they had begun together, she knew what she had to do. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and typed out a message to Frank. "I'm coming back. We have a lot to talk about." As she hit send, Ashley felt a strange mix of fear and determination. This was not the end of her journey, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test the limits of forgiveness, challenge her understanding of redemption, and ultimately, teach her the true meaning of unconditional love. With one last look at the starry sky above, Ashley turned and walked back into the hospital, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The promise she had made on that bridge 6 weeks ago still held true, but now it had taken on a new, more profound meaning. One day at a time, one act of kindness at a time, she would navigate this new reality, not just for herself, but for Frank, for Madison and Emily, and for all the lives she had touched and would continue to touch on this unexpected journey. The rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors filled the air as Ashley made her way back to Frank's room. Her heart raced, each step feeling like a monumental effort. The weight of Frank's revelation pressed heavily on her shoulders, threatening to overwhelm her. But she had made a promise to Frank, to herself, to the universe, and she intended to keep it. As she pushed open the door, Frank's eyes met hers. The relief on his face was palpable, mixed with a fear that Ashley had never seen in him before. "You came back," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. Ashley nodded, settling into the chair beside his bed. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and tumultuous emotions. Finally, Ashley broke the silence. "Start from the beginning," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to hear everything." Frank took a deep breath, his aged hands fidgeting with the hospital blanket. "It was a night much like the one when we met," he began. "I was young, barely older than you are now. I'd had too much to drink, convinced myself I was okay to drive." As Frank's story unfolded, Ashley felt as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. He spoke of a rainy night, a momentary distraction, the sickening crunch of metal. 2 lives snuffed out in an instant, a young couple with their whole lives ahead of them. "I didn't know who they were at first," Frank continued, his voice breaking. "It wasn't until later, when I saw their names in the newspaper. God, Ashley, when I realized they were your parents." Ashley's world tilted on its axis. The parents she had loved and lost, the accident that had shaped her entire life. It all came back to Frank. The man who had saved her on the bridge was the same one who had orphaned her years ago. "Why?" she managed to choke out. "Why did you help me that night? Why didn't you tell me?" Frank's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "At first, I didn't know it was you on that bridge. But when you told me your story, when I realized who you were, I couldn't bear to cause you more pain. I thought if I could help you, guide you towards a better path, maybe I could begin to atone for what I'd done." Ashley stood abruptly, needing to move, to process. She paced the small hospital room, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion. They all warred within her. But underneath it all, there was something else. A flicker of understanding, of empathy. "I've lived with this guilt for so long," Frank continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every day, I've tried to honor your parents' memory by helping others. But nothing I do will ever bring them back, will ever make up for what I took from you." Ashley stopped pacing, turning to face Frank. In that moment, she saw him not as the wise mentor who had saved her life, nor as the monster who had taken her parents. She saw him as he truly was, a flawed, broken human being, crushed under the weight of his mistakes and desperate for redemption. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Ashley said honestly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again. But..." She paused, thinking of the promise she had made, of the journey she had embarked upon. "But I made a commitment to kindness, to understanding. And that has to extend to everyone, even those who have hurt me the most." Frank nodded, a single tear rolling down his weathered cheek. "I understand," he said, "and I want you to know that whatever you decide, whatever you need from me, even if it's for me to disappear from your life, I'll do it. You deserve that choice." As Ashley opened her mouth to respond, a commotion in the hallway caught her attention. A familiar voice, raised in distress, reached her ears. Without thinking, she moved to the door, peering out into the corridor. There, arguing with a nurse, was Madison. Her usually perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, her eyes wild with panic. In her arms, she cradled a limp Emily. "Please," Madison was begging. "Someone help her. She just collapsed, and I didn't know where else to go." Acting on instinct, Ashley rushed out into the hallway. "Madison," she called. "What happened?" Madison turned, relief flooding her face at the sight of a familiar face. "Ashley, it's Emily. She was fine one minute, and then she just..." She won't wake up. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Emily was whisked away by a team of doctors, leaving Madison and Ashley to wait anxiously in a sterile waiting room. As the night wore on, Madison broke down, revealing the full extent of Emily's condition and the mounting medical bills that had pushed her to the brink. It was nearly dawn when the doctor finally emerged, his face grave. "Emily's condition has deteriorated," he explained gently. "She needs a specialized treatment, but..." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Given your financial situation, I'm not sure." "No," Madison interrupted, her voice breaking. "Please, there has to be something you can do. Can't lose her. She's all I have." As Ashley watched Madison crumble, something clicked into place. Without fully understanding why, she found herself speaking. "Wait," she said. What if we could cover the cost of Emily's treatment?" Madison looked at her in shock. "Ashley, what are you talking about? That's impossible." But Ashley's mind was racing. She turned to the doctor. "How much would the treatment cost?" The doctor named a figure that made Ashley's head spin. It was an astronomical amount, far more than she could ever hope to afford. But as she stood there, caught between Madison's desperation and the weight of Frank's revelation, Ashley knew what she had to do. "I need to make a phone call," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Doctor, please start the treatment. I promise we'll find a way to cover it." As Madison embraced her, sobbing with relief and gratitude, Ashley felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. She had no idea how she was going to fulfill this promise, but she knew she had to try. This, she realized, was what Frank had been trying to teach her all along, that true redemption comes not from grand gestures, but from choosing compassion and kindness even in the face of impossible odds. With a deep breath, Ashley stepped away from Madison and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over Frank's number for a moment before she pressed dial. As the phone rang, she steeled herself for the conversation ahead. This was it, the moment that would define not just her relationship with Frank, but the very course of her life. As Frank's voice came on the line, Ashley closed her eyes and took the plunge. "Frank," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help. It's time for both of us to make things right." The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a golden glow through the hospital windows. As Ashley began to explain the situation to Frank, she felt as if she were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and difficult choices. But for the first time in a long time, Ashley felt truly alive, ready to face whatever came next one day, one act of kindness at a time. The first rays of sunlight crept through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the tired faces of Ashley and Madison. The night had been a crucible of emotions, testing the limits of their newfound friendship and Ashley's commitment to her promise of kindness. Ashley's conversation with Frank had been brief but intense. She had explained Emily's situation and the astronomical cost of her treatment. Frank, without hesitation, had agreed to help. "I'll make some calls," he had said, his voice filled with a determination that Ashley had never heard before. "Whatever it takes, we'll find a way." Now, as they waited for news about Emily, Ashley found herself grappling with a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The anger and betrayal she felt towards Frank warred with gratitude for his immediate willingness to help. It was as if the universe was testing her, pushing her to the very limits of her capacity for forgiveness and compassion. Madison's voice, hoarse from hours of worry, broke through Ashley's reverie. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why are you doing this? Why would you and Frank help us like this?" Ashley took a deep breath, weighing her words carefully. How could she explain the complex web of guilt, redemption, and unexpected connections that had led to this moment? "It's complicated," she began. "Frank and I were connected in ways I'm still trying to understand. But what I do know is that helping Emily, helping you, it's the right thing to do. It's part of a promise I made, to myself and to the world." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve this kindness," she whispered, Not after how I treated you. Ashley reached out, taking Madison's hand in hers. That's the thing about kindness, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. It's not about deserving. It's about giving, even when, especially when, it's hard. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Frank, wheeled in by a nurse despite his protests that he could walk. His face was pale, the strain of his own health crisis evident in the lines around his eyes, but there was a fire in his gaze that Ashley had never seen before. It's done, he announced without preamble. I've made arrangements for Emily's treatment. Everything's taken care of. Madison gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. How? I don't understand. Frank's eyes met Ashley's, a silent communication passing between them. Let's just say I'm settling some very old debts, he said softly. Before anyone could respond, a doctor approached, his face unreadable. Ms. Carter, he said, addressing Madison. We have news about Emily. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical jargon and cautious optimism. Emily's condition was critical but stable. The specialized treatment Frank had arranged was her best hope. But there were no guarantees. All they could do now was wait and hope. As Madison sat vigil by Emily's bedside, Ashley found herself alone with Frank in the hospital cafeteria. The weight of unspoken words hung heavy between them. You didn't have to do this, Ashley said finally, breaking the silence. Frank's aged hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee, his knuckles white with tension. Yes, I did, he replied. Ashley, what I did to your parents, it's a debt I can never fully repay. But this, helping Emily, it's a start. Ashley felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm still angry, she admitted. Part of me wants to hate you for what you took from me. But then I think about that night on the bridge, about everything that's happened since. I don't know how to reconcile it all. Frank nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. You don't have to figure it out all at once, he said gently. Healing takes time. Forgiveness, if it comes, takes even longer. All I ask is that you give yourself the grace to feel whatever you need to feel. As they talked, delving deeper into the painful past and the uncertain future, Ashley felt something shift within her. The anger was still there, a dull ache in her chest, but alongside it grew something else, a fragile understanding. The first tentative steps towards forgiveness. Days blended into weeks as Emily fought for her life. Ashley found herself splitting her time between the hospital, where she supported Madison and helped with Emily's care, and her continued acts of daily kindness. Each small gesture, from buying coffee for a stressed nurse to organizing a fundraiser for the hospital's pediatric ward, felt like a step towards healing, not just for those she helped, but for herself as well. Frank's health improved slowly, but he remained a constant presence, his quiet strength an anchor for both Ashley and Madison. As they kept vigil together, unlikely allies united by circumstance and compassion, Ashley marveled at the strange turns life could take. It was a month to the day since Emily's collapse when the doctor entered the waiting room, a smile breaking through his professional demeanor. She's asking for her mom, he announced, and her Aunt Ashley. The wave of relief that washed over the room was palpable. Madison burst into tears, while Frank closed his eyes, murmuring what sounded like a prayer of thanks. Ashley stood frozen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. As they entered Emily's room, Ashley hanging back to give Madison a moment alone with her daughter, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Frank, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thank you, he said simply, for giving me the chance to make this right, for showing me what true redemption looks like. Ashley felt her own eyes fill with tears. We're not done yet, she said softly. There's still a long road ahead, for all of us. Frank nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. One day at a time, he reminded her. One act of kindness at a time. As Ashley stepped into the room, greeted by Emily's weak but radiant smile and Madison's tear-stained face of joy, she felt something settle in her heart. The journey ahead was still uncertain, fraught with challenges and difficult conversations. But in this moment, surrounded by the tangible results of compassion and forgiveness, Ashley knew that she was exactly where she needed to be. The promise she had made on that fateful night on the bridge had led her here, to a place of healing, of unexpected connections, and of profound transformation. As she took Emily's small hand in hers, Ashley silently renewed that promise. To keep showing up, to keep choosing kindness, to keep believing in the power of second chances, and not just for others, but for herself as well. The road to forgiveness and redemption was long and winding, but Ashley was ready to walk it, one step at a time, with an open heart and an unwavering commitment to the transformative power of kindness. The gentle warmth of the rising sun filtered through the curtains of Ashley's apartment, painting the room in hues of gold and amber. It had been exactly 1 year since that fateful night on the bridge, a year filled with more challenges, growth, and unexpected connections than Ashley could have ever imagined. As she sat at her small kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee warming her hands, Ashley's gaze fell on the well-worn notebook Frank had given her. Its pages were now filled with 365 entries, each one a testament to her journey of kindness and self-discovery. With a deep breath, Ashley opened the notebook to its final blank page. Today marked the end of her promise to Frank, but as she put pen to paper, she realized it was really just the beginning. "Dear Frank," she wrote, her handwriting steady and sure, "1 year ago you saved my life, not just by stopping me on that bridge, but by showing me the power of kindness and second chances. Today, as I fulfill my promise to you, I want to make a new one, to continue this journey, not out of obligation, but because I've discovered it's who I truly am." As Ashley wrote, her mind wandered over the events of the past year. Emily's recovery had been slow but steady, each small milestone a victory celebrated by their unlikely family. Madison had thrown herself into advocacy work, starting a support group for parents of children with chronic illnesses. And Frank had become a constant in Ashley's life, their weekly diner meetings evolving into deep conversations about life, loss, and redemption. The anger Ashley had initially felt towards him had gradually transformed into something more complex, a mix of understanding, forgiveness, and a deep, abiding gratitude for the second chance they had both been given. A knock at the door pulled Ashley from her reverie. She opened it to find Madison and Emily, both grinning widely. "Happy anniversary!" Emily exclaimed, her voice strong and clear, a far cry from the frail whisper it had been in the hospital. Madison enveloped Ashley in a warm hug. "1 year since you changed our lives," she said softly. "We couldn't let the day pass without celebrating." As they settled in the living room, Emily proudly showing off her latest art project, a colorful drawing of what she called their chosen family, Ashley marveled at the unexpected turns life could take. A year ago, she had been ready to end it all. Now, she was surrounded by love and purpose she never could have imagined. The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and shared memories. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, there was another knock at the door. Ashley opened it to find Frank, looking more sprightly than he had in months. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said with a warm smile, "but I couldn't miss this day." As Frank joined their gathering, Ashley felt a sense of completeness wash over her. Here they were, the boutique manager who had once humiliated her, the man responsible for her parents' death, and the little girl whose life had brought them all together, now an integral part of her chosen family. Later, as they all sat around Ashley's small dining table, Frank raised his glass in a toast. "To Ashley," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught us all the true meaning of forgiveness and the power of kindness." Ashley felt tears prick at her eyes as she looked around at the faces of those who had become so dear to her. "To second chances," she added softly, "and to the family we choose." As the evening wound down and her guests prepared to leave, Ashley felt a sense of anticipation building within her. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one she would write on her own terms. Once alone, Ashley returned to her notebook, finishing the letter she had started that morning. "Frank," she wrote, "you once told me that the secret to healing was showing up, day after day, and doing what we can. I understand that now in a way I never could have before. This year has taught me that true strength lies not in being invulnerable, but in having the courage to be open to pain, to joy, to the messy, beautiful complexity of human connection. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I will continue to choose kindness, to believe in the power of forgiveness, and to honor the precious gift of life you helped me rediscover. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late for a new beginning. With endless gratitude, Ashley. As she closed the notebook, Ashley felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her purpose, her chosen family, and a strength within herself she never knew existed. Ashley walked to the window, gazing out at the twinkling lights of Boulder. The city that had once felt so isolating now seemed full of possibility. Tomorrow, she would wake up and continue her mission of kindness, not because of a promise, but because it had become the very essence of who she was. As she turned away from the window, Ashley's eyes fell on the framed photo of her parents. For the first time in years, she felt no pain looking at their smiling faces. Instead, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the love they had given her, for the journey that had brought her here, and for the countless lives she now had the privilege of touching. "I hope I've made you proud," she whispered to the photograph. And as she prepared for bed, ready to greet the dawn of a new day and a new chapter in her life, Ashley Wilson knew in her heart that she had. The end of her promise was just the beginning of her purpose. And with each new day, each small act of kindness, she would continue to honor the incredible gift she had been given, the chance to live, to love, and to make a difference in the world, one compassionate choice at a time. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button below and join our community. Based on your interests, we've picked this story for you that's showing on your screen right now. Click to watch it now. We're sure you'll love it. See you next time.